I'll start with Dr. Norbert Myslinski. So Dr. Norbert is a professor at the University of Maryland, School of Dentistry. And in my research, when I first met Dr. Norbert, it was at the Symposium about Civic Engagement, and he was asking questions. And these questions were very, very good questions. And I could tell that there was something about just the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, and there was a lot more. And I asked him, if he wanted to be on this panel, and he said yes, but what I did not know that was Dr. Norbert Myslinski is an international superstar. He is the founder of the Brain Beat, which is a competition that exposes young people to neuroscience and to the brain. And when I mean international, I mean international. My father, Achike Oranye, is my dad. He raised me and my two brothers. And before our time, he had his own buildings grandma in the sovereign nation called Biafra. And in his own, time during the Nigerian Civil War era, where the Igbos were almost annihilated, a time where what is known as I believe the Red Cross, if I'm not mistaken, the Red Cross started because of the amount of support that was brought to Biafra because of the graphic images, of kwashiorkor, which is when children in war and famine, their bellies are full, but they're actually starving. It was a war that brought about a lot of the relief efforts that exist today. And he currently fights the war on poverty in Baltimore at Code Blue Alerts, supporting homeless, across the city, and also being a rock in the Nigerian community here in Baltimore. Dr. Davina is a famous economist and also my previous professor at Carey Business School, and that of my younger brother, Bello. And he's someone that is very intentional with the way he teaches and engages with his students, making sure to be a rock, be a mentor, be someone that develops them beyond the classroom and engages with them and reaches out and supports them also beyond the classroom. And also in my research, I didn't know this when I was in his class, but he had some very, very fascinating discoveries about the economies of health. And I think, a lot of his work is very applicable to what we can learn about Baltimore and just the way, the Black community, I feel like is a part of that entire thing and that picture. And not just healthcare, but also when it comes to eating, how we eat, what's available to us. And so, people that make money off of the obesity of certain communities. And last but not least, I met Dr. J, who is the Dean Emeritus at Tufts University, Biomedical Sciences. I met him in DC at a panel that was about flourishing. And when I met Dr. J, I was teaching at City College High School. I was teaching IB English. And when I was teaching, I had to engage with my students in this novel that was called The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. And when I came to this panel, I was in search for curiosity for my own awe of wonder, and I asked a question to Dr. J on the panel, and that question was about recognizing the interconnectedness of awe and wonder for the world as we chase our individual awe and wonder. Because the whole point of that panel was the way you really flourish is through interdisciplinary engagement, through the arts that forms new neurological links in the brain, that can be a way of healing trauma, through looking at the moon and wondering, like, what's up there? Just having something that makes you interested to let you search your curiosity for the world. And he wanted to keep in touch with me, and here he is, following through. So I have much appreciation for everyone on this panel, and I hope, we started with introspection, we went to sort of systematic challenges, and now, I want to really get to the point where we can evolve. How do you do that? What are these sort of layers to how you can learn, how you can engage, how you can be yourself, and how you show up for you and for others around you. And I'll let, I think, some of us have presentations. But do you guys want an introduction, or should we just go straight to the presentations?
We can introduce us.
Okay, so we'll just start softly before the presentations. But what I want to start with is just how are you feeling right now?
Great. I'm feeling old. Back in January 1st, 1975, I came here as a new faculty member. So I've been here for 50 years, teaching and doing research on this campus. Thank you. Continuously, except for a sabbatical I had in England for a year. But anyway, when I mention that, people look at me and they say, why? Why are you here? Why are you retired? And I tell them, because I'm still having fun. I said, when I stop being fun, then I can retire. Which leads me to one of the main statements that I wanted to say today. And I prepared a 15-minute talk for young people in the crowd. And that statement, the take-home message to them was, follow your heart. Follow your heart, but make sure you take your brain with you. So I've always taught my two children, Matthew and Kelly, two things when they were growing up. It's passion and compassion. Passion for life and compassion for your fellow man. Topics that were brought up in the last two panels here. So to practice what I preach, I decided to use some compassion on all of you and not give my 15-minute talk. Forget about that, because we're over time already, 20 minutes. So I'm not going to give you what I prepared. But I'm going to say two things. One is about the brain, one is about the heart. And the first thing about the brain is I'm a neuroscientist. About the brain, it has neuroplasticity. Right? It's a characteristic of the human brain, neuroplasticity. That means you can mold your brain into whatever you would like. When we're born, only half of our brains are hardwired. The other half are waiting for you to tell it what's important. For you to tell it what to do. By your actions, by what you sense, what you feel, what you think, the experiences you have. It tells your brain, oh, we're going to have more processing power here, or we're going to have more processing power here. Right? So this talk I was going to have had to do with careers. And just like the human brain, you can mold your careers to whatever you like. And follow your heart. Taking your brain with you. And the last thing regarding heart has to do with an individual who lived in the 60s. His name was Robert F. Kennedy. He was the brother of John F. Kennedy. And at his funeral, and his eulogy, it was said that he was a good and decent man. That where there was sickness, he tried to heal. Where there was evil, he tried to produce good. Where there was war, he tried to produce peace. And as he said many times across the whole United States, he would say, some people look at things the way they are and ask why. But I dream things that could possibly be and ask why not. So all the young people that may be still here, there were about 5 of them initially. All right, remember, follow your heart. You know, I was going to talk about my kids who followed their hearts and their dreams, you know, my spouse and so forth. And you follow your heart, and you're going to have to get up every day. You're going to have to go to work. So it's best that you do something that you enjoy and like, and you're going to make your life a lot better, and you're going to make the world a lot better place to live in. So that's my abbreviated presentation.
Hello. When Achike was introducing me, dragged me here. Yes. I presently do the direction of the city opioid overdose response team. Been working with people, encouraging people, and doing outreach to the homeless, focusing on the population that struggle with mental health and addiction illness. Just cycling back further, I came to this Baltimore in 2001. Came here as a student with Loyola College, and primarily studied in the field of pastoral counseling, because I was seeking for a pathway that integrates both psychiatric counseling and spirituality. So there was a visiting professor from Loyola College at Ateneo de Manila University in Manila, Philippines, where I was doing pastoral ministry. His name is Kevin Gillespie. And in the class, we were taught about the best way to provide a healing journey for those who are coming for help in counseling. And that was my introduction to Loyola College. Sorry, they call it Loyola University now, so forgive my my time, categorization. And so primarily, and one of the things that really struck me is when I was here at that time, there was a study and a program that was in experiential stage at that time. There was this program that recruited a bunch of teenagers from the city, and they were sent to Kenya. It was called the Baraka Program. It was funded by Able Foundation and run by the Jesuits, then with Ignatius Academy. And so boys that we are taken from here experiencing what they call at-risk kids, they were drafted to Kenya and exposed to a different type of nurturing and and lifestyle. And of course, that program initially was very successful, but it later, died, of course, because the people who went there came back right into the environment that really was the original triggers of the experiences that they were exposed to, so it wasn't really right. But then what struck me was then when I volunteered, I was volunteering at St. Matthew's Church in a trauma healing group, and of course I was also in time at Perry Point, Veterans Medical System. I was working with Alan Parson. And then that was when we also discovered that then, contrary to what people think, there was a survey that compared 15 to 19-year-olds that were here in the city with 3 cities. One was Johannesburg, South Africa. One was Ibadan in Nigeria, and then one was India. So they compared a cross-section of the youth in this category, and then found out from their responses that the kids living in the city felt worse than kids living in what is universally categorized as underdeveloped or developing societies. I'm talking about Baltimore, Ibadan in Nigeria, and in New Delhi in India. And so that really struck me. And so the rest is history, because then I was working, and one of the people who pioneered street outreach then, Park Heights was the epicenter of the AIDS epidemic. And of course, I also found out that also Park Heights or Northwest Baltimore was also the epicenter of infant mortality, the worst outcomes of pregnancies for young people coming up, and of course we know who lives there, who continues living there. And so that's the part of the work that kind of got me to commit to the city. And so I adopted Baltimore as my home, as my own, and that's where we've been, for the past 25 years counting. So, my training again, was in pastoral counseling, or pastoral clinical counseling, whatever baptismal name you want to give it. And so that's where I've been working, until currently. And the last thing I'll say before I turn over the mic is that if we look at the data that we have for the mortality that it was coming from opioid overdose from 2010 to 2015, and then when it upped, very precipitously to 2018 before we crested in 2020, because we know what COVID did, coming till now. I just believe that when I was doing my thesis here, I was, crafting a pathway to healing that is companionship. Nobody, no therapist, no doctor can trigger healing without connection with the person who is before them. And so my model of companionship as a way of being in providing a space, a healing space for someone who's consulting, who's coming for engagement, is for me the paradigm that every therapist, social worker, healing practitioner, primary care, whatever field that you're coming from, needs to be able to inculcate and put down And so that the person who comes in feels a welcome, connects with you, and from there it's the work that you start, because psychopharmacology, pharmacology for regular, primary care, the part of the healing quotient in that is 70% is the practitioner, 30% is the actual medication. So also facing the city where we know that the social determinants of health, we know how it's loaded, just like the first presentation here. And so that's why I said to myself, it's good that this platform is created so that we would have that interaction that gives us a perspective that changes the dynamic for us, the way we see things that we do and the way we interact with the community. So I want to really have that opportunity to interact as we go along. Thank you. I think I'm speaking too long.
Thank you. So I'm going to actually pick up where the last speaker left off, thinking about connection. And when I think about how I'm feeling right now, despite the many challenges both of the first two panels talked about, how we treat children in the incarceration system, economic inequity, because of connections that I have had the opportunity to make in Baltimore and through my career at Johns Hopkins, I'm still hopeful and optimistic. And when I think about why, I think about the different accessories I have on today. So I've got 4 bracelets. One of them I bought when I was on vacation with my spouse last year. We moved to Baltimore in 1996. We came from Michigan. We met at Penn State. I grew up outside Philadelphia. So I've always lived east of the Mississippi, but we have been in Baltimore for almost 29 years. Same house, same neighborhood, same employer. And there's something to be said for the stability and the opportunity to get to know the people around you, whether it's at the employer, in the neighborhood, at the kids. We have 3 sons, the schools that they've gone to, and to become part of that community and connect and understand what are some of the needs of the community. Second bracelet was brought to me by a colleague who went to China. When I joined Johns Hopkins University in 1996 in the School of Public Health, I never thought I'd be reading 700 Chinese names at graduation someday. I read all the names at our business school graduation. I've been doing that since 2014. Many of our full-time students are from China. Different perspective, different issues, but I learned from them and they learned from me. And the opportunity to continue to grow and the growth that has come through being at both the School of Public Health and the business school over the 29 years is important. The third one is a Turkish evil eye design that was given to me by one of my mentees. Mentoring, as both Chijoke and Bo know, has been part of what I do, part of what I talk about. I give a TEDx talk on it, and thinking about the importance of connecting with people who want to learn from me, and again, and I from them. And taking the opportunities that I've had in an amazing 29-year career, where I've had the thought of, here's what I want to do. It's never stayed exactly the same for very long, but I've had one basic dream. How can I help make other people's lives better? And I've experimented and expanded on and explored different ways of doing that in my 29 years. And now I realize the biggest thing that I can do is help other people to do that. The fourth one was something that a cousin of mine who passed 3 years ago at a relatively young age had, and I inherited from her. When I spoke at her celebration of life up in York, Pennsylvania, another city that had once been industrial, is now quite run down. She had substance abuse issues most of her adult life. When I got done speaking, here I am, someone from Baltimore in a 3-piece suit speaking at my cousin who didn't have a college degree, who had substance abuse all of her adulthood. Well, we had connected like never before the last 8 years of her life. And I was one of the few family members who still gave her the time of day, because I saw my cousin on her good days. And on her good days, she was just as thoughtful and kind and generous as anybody else. And that's what I told everybody who was there that day. This is the story of my cousin on her good days. And the pastor at the church when I got done said, whatever you're doing right now is the wrong thing. You need to be doing something else. I teach different things now. I'm a health economist by training, but I teach ethics as the main course that I teach. A course about how you bring values to what you do in the workplace and your community. And the importance of knowing your own and being able to understand other people's and talk about how they match up or don't match up as you try to solve problems. That goes along with the most significant pair of earrings that I have, which came from me from one of my children, butterfly wings, sign of transformation. And so between that, I've got one anklet with Morse code for choose hope and the other with Morse code for be the change. Those are the types of things that through my 29 years, faculty in 2 different schools, thinking about health economics, thinking about the healthcare system, thinking about the opportunities that it provides and the opportunities that many people don't get to take part in it. While, like I said, most recently focusing much more on how I bring values to the students and how I can teach the students the importance of bringing their values with them once they've carefully identified what their values are and not what the values of their parents were, not what the values of their leaders are, not what the values of whatever belief system they have might be, but truly their values and their heart, mind, and soul, and what they bring to everyone. And so that still brings me hope. And hearing conversations like we're having today is part of having that hope. Thank you.
Well, you ask how I'm feeling. I'm feeling very humbled. One by my distinguished fellow panelists, but the 2 previous panels were so moving to me because each set represented leaders who are making a difference for the community and doing it at the grassroots level, one individual at a time. And gosh, that's absolutely amazing. I think I was not going to give my little talk, but I guess I will. And as Achike is queuing it up, the title from Biafra to Baltimore. So my loving partner, in her loving way, said, "Why are you going to this? You know nothing about either." I've been in Baltimore for 29 hours, but I said to her, and I meant it fully, that I go to be unteachable. I'll go to learn things, and boy, did I ever. So I really thank you all for what you've given me before I start to tell you what I'm doing. And I think what I hear as a theme for the closing out of this is community and connection, and how do we repair the world? And again, you've seen wonderful examples of this already, and nothing is beyond repair, especially our young people. So if we go to the next slide, what I do is, I don't work on public health, I don't work on education, I don't work in the prison system. I bring art and science together. That's what I do because I care very deeply, and I think and I believe that by connecting these 2 supposedly disparate things, we bring an opportunity for transformative creativity, for outreach and inspiring wonder and awe in our young people. And one way to repair and build for the future is to not have dreams deferred. Next, we keep on flashing through this. This gives examples throughout history, all the way back to the very first scene in a cave of a human shown on a screen, to the James Webb Telescope, and how inspirational those figures are. Keep going. There's more, right? Yes. Anyway, we can flip through all this, but the bottom line is that we're in an interesting time in which we have this wonderful science which is telling us so much about the world. But I think the important thing about this is when it can inspire our humanity. So next slide, please. My mission is to inspire where art and science meet. I've been doing this for about 15 years, but I've had parallel careers in both science and keep flashing through in art. That's me with my largest piece. And I've been called a unicorn. But what I believe now is that what I can do with the last years of my life is to create a breeding farm for unicorns. So next slide. Part of this is working with the Borough's Welcome Fund in North Carolina to create something called Enfold, and then now Sci-Art Nexus. And it's bringing thought leaders who do art or science or both and figuring out how we can influence the next generation to believe that these two things can be melded together for something special. Next slide. This is just my own current artwork, and I'll only focus on the two on the right. I have retired from my academic career so I can dedicate myself full time to that. But the two panels on the left are examples of art which I use scientific materials as new art media. And in this case, it's biological stains from my own laboratory. But you see paper cutouts on each of them. The top one is from 50-year-old notes of mine about the Schrodinger's equation from when I was building my vessel, and the bottom is cutouts of my own scientific papers, and I call that unpacking the vessel because I have to get rid of all that ego-driven crap that I thought was so important for the rest of my life, so that I can be open to this kind of spirituality. Next. That's who I am. This is images of me, but I really, thank you, we'll stop there. So I make art out of scientific materials, magnetic fields, elements of the periodic table. Go to the next slide, and really what I care about here is outreach. And as the previous speaker, Davina, mentioned, reaching young minds is such a critical part of this, and the way that I can do this is use that thinking between these two siloed fields as a way to inspire young people in, I do a lot of workshops in underserved communities, but using art, my science art, as a way to reach them. On the left is a large 25-foot mural made with a class from a school called the I just lost that name. It's the Boston's High School for Performing and Visual Arts, which again serves a very underserved community. We made this large scroll here together after I gave them a chemistry class on why is iron magnetic. That piece was shown for a full year at the Boston Convention Center, where over 1 million people got to see this piece of work with all of their names beside it, so that they could tell their parents and bring them to the Boston Convention Center and say, I have a work that's been shown to many, many people. On the right, there's the top right is a work with the periodic table. I'm not going to talk about that. The bottom, and I'll talk a little bit more about the art there, is working with gunpowder, or the elements of gunpowder, carbon, sulfur, and potassium nitrate, which together form something that's explosive and leads to violence, but separate through a black, a yellow, and a white pigment, and you can make art from it. The reason I'm showing this picture is that this is a little show that I had at the Ontario Science Centre, which was my childhood science museum, and inspired me as a 10-year-old to do what I did. The real hero in this picture is the gentleman on the left. This is a teacher of a Tamil community in northern Ontario who drove 400 miles on a Saturday with his class to see this show. So, and the smiles on the faces of these children, it was the best reward I've ever had. Next slide. So that's what I just told you. Let me show you a little bit about this work, because I think it's been a wonderful opportunity to do outreach to communities which have been exposed to gun violence. Next slide, please. Here are two examples, and the black you see is carbon, the yellow you see is sulfur, and the white you can see is potassium nitrate. On the left is one called In Memoriam, and in this case, I used crystallized forms of those three components to spell out the words in childlike script of Columbine, Aurora, and Sandy Hook, which were all locations of mass killings of young people. You can't read the red writing that's there, but at the time that this was made, there were 137 schools in which there had been multiple children killed by gun violence. I have to say that since this work was made, that number has tripled. On the right is a little cartoon comic book panel, and I show this because it was made in 2017, and it was based on what might happen in a Trump administration. It shows scenes that you get closer and closer to the statue. It shows scenes of things like incarceration of undocumented immigrants, etc. But they show closer and closer scenes of the Statue of Liberty, and in the bottom right you see the Statue of Liberty face with a tear, and in the droplet of the tear is an upside down image of a man with orange hair and a red tie. Next slide. Melanin and Black Lives Matter. I don't have to tell this community how this has been a major issue. Talking about the science of it, the difference of melanin, it turns out between the blackest black person and the whitest white person is only a factor of 2 in concentration, and that's an absolutely silly reason to have a discrimination, basis for discrimination and systemic racism. So I decided to use the compound melanin. It's a protein that's found in hair color, skin color, but also in squid ink to make art. Next slide. So this shows the chemical structure of melanin drawn with melanin itself, squid ink. That is each row is a twofold dilution of it, but you see the polymeric chemical structure of melanin. Next slide. These are portraits made of Trayvon Martin and George Floyd, made with twofold dilutions of melanin in tribute of these 2 gentlemen and to mourn their passing. Next slide. So, why do I do this? There's lots of reasons, and I think I've sort of alluded to them, but I think there's a much larger and greater sense of it, and it gets to this concept of repairing the world. Many ancient cultures, we can learn from the wisdom of these cultures, have come up with this idea that we have to live in harmony with the world, that we have to live as a community, that we live as equals, whether it's Ubuntu from the African cultures, Alohe from the indigenous American cultures, Dharma from Buddhism, or Tikkun Olam from the Jewish tradition. And so build community, respect our planet. These are the goals of our scientific outreach, and I'll stop there. Thanks.
So my next question for the panelists, because you all work with communities, and so because this panel is really about transformation, evolution. What do you do, and what it is about what you understand about the people, the communities that you work with that allows you to flip the script, and almost in a literal sense, right? Where, because I think when it comes to research, you wait like decades for recommendations to come out. Then those recommendations have to be approved by legislators to become policy, and the policy has to be implemented by people that work for the state, local government, work in civil society, and then the implementation then has to have an effect. Whereas it's a long, drawn-out process. So when you all work with the people that you work with, what is it that you're able to do to really flip this? Because to me, it's not about immediate gratification. It's about true impact. And I think true impact, you don't have to wait for it. I think true impact starts small and it can increase, but it starts. It's not something you have to wait for. So what is it about how you do what you do that allows you to flip the script of the communities you work with?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. The flipping in my mind has to do with changing places between the teacher and the student. I mean, I teach many students. I have programs throughout the world, 50 countries, another program, 120 countries. And with the Brain Bee that was mentioned, we have about 30,000 students competing every year. and all these cultures from the different countries come together. And I'm always amazed, what a wonderful group of students there is in the world, that my hope for the future is enhanced. And I'm out there with my programs to try to inspire these students, motivate them to go into neuroscience so they can help treat, find cures for brain disorders. And it's split because I'm the one that's inspired. I'm the one that's motivated to continue what I'm doing. Because they're just wonderful out there. And they are so different. You talk about differences in culture. Because I have students from all 6 continents, all through Asia and Africa and Europe, South America and so forth. And every year I have to learn more about their cultures and about things that they're doing because I make mistakes. I make a lot of mistakes. I mean, I remember once there was a student who wouldn't shake hands with a woman on the stage when he was receiving an award. And I said, well, you didn't shake hands with her, you shook hands with everybody else. And he says, well, in our country, we don't do that. We don't shake hands with women. And I didn't know that, So, and there are other situations where I learn every year about culture, and I just have to continue learning. It's lifelong learning on my part, and so forth. But the idea of flipping the student and teacher, I think, is very alive, very relevant to what I do.
Well, for me, if I dial back to my own history, which is primarily what has contributed to my formative experience, I was born in a little town at the banks of the River Niger in Nigeria, the east of Nigeria, and I was about maybe 7 years going to 8 when the Civil War broke out in my country. And from then, we were, first of all, displaced from my town, and we had to go trek about 24 miles to the place where we took refuge. And so then my nomenclature changed to internally displaced family and child. And then 3 years later, the disease of kwashiorkor hit Nigeria, the part of Nigeria from where I was, which was called the east part of Nigeria, recognized as Biafra. And that was one of the kids that was suffering, great deprivation. We had to sustain daily from food rations, and that was the formative stage of Médecins Sans Frontières, which is Doctors Without Borders. And so as a child with my father and my mother, first in a refugee camp, and then lots of disruptions that happened there. And eventually we were actually on the verge of being exterminated because we were blockaded militarily in a small corner of that part of Nigeria. And so because the rate of death was very high at that time, the actual solution that was explored was the opportunity to transport the kids out so that all the kids can die out. And so I was one of the kids that was flown from Nigeria first to Ivory Coast, and Ivory Coast wouldn't accept us. And then we ended up in Gabon, Libreville, Gabon, where I was in a refugee camp. And so at that time also, because me and my little brother were the two people that were flown out, that was the disruption of our family structure for the next 3 years. So I lived as a refugee child. But prior to that, there was a little incident that I wanted to just foreground for everyone. We were in a refugee camp collecting rations when we had Russian MiG fighters descend on the refugee camp and was bombing and strafing the whole population. So there was lots of death, lots of bodies. So imagine if you just focus on that picture, if you hold that mental picture briefly. And so in my mind of that little boy, I wanted to go kill the pilot. I wanted to kill everybody. So I had to live with that trauma. And then I was moved away from my family, put in a different country. That was where I was introduced to French, and of course lived in that refugee camp. Before the war ended in 1970, and we were repatriated back to reconnect with families in 1971. And so because there was lack of records, you had to identify if your father stands up, anybody from your family stands up. The way that they arranged the reunification was you had to identify your father by sight, or your mother, or whoever was there, before you were reunified, because there was records was not really there. And so just when you span that, and then when we came back, there was supposed to be reconstruction, rehabilitation, and reunification. Of course, those were just, verbs that were not used, we are not activated. So if a verb doesn't get activated, it goes back to maybe a noun. And well, flip later back, and as I was, growing up, whatever you wanted to do, you held as your dream is already smashed up. And so I found myself, by the time I finished school, back in my country of origin, after reunification, and seeing this guy who's supposed to be my dad, we are almost like at the same level, because when we went back to go to school, we really had nothing to thrive with. And so, 10 years after, I had to emigrate back from Nigeria, then lived in Japan after doing my first degree in communications, and then before I found myself in Japan, where I stayed for about 5 years, and where eventually our first child was born. Now, why am I telling this story? Because this is real. And then, so when I came here many years after, and then found that the outcomes that were being expected from people, young kids facing violence here, that those outcomes were almost the same as a country like mine that had gone through this fratricide or civil war. So it became for me an affinity, a spirit of affinity. Like if I engage a child that's in front of me, I say to him, it's not about what tomorrow will happen, it's not about theory, it's about what do we do to get you to the next safe place first. So I was one of the first people in the city that jumped into what they call Housing First, which was a program that was originated by Sam Severis over in New York, where they were doing outreach to people who were struggling with homelessness and mental health and addiction issues. Give them housing first. So, and again, like I said earlier when I was over at Park Heights, and they were saying, oh, you have accent, you can go to the city, this and that. I was on the front row of boots on the ground going to each family, because people were really private, and going to each family and saying, this child has to go to school. How do you get them to school? I took them, I was going to parents' teachers' meeting for the kids that their parents were, falling to AIDS and, mental and, addiction to illness. I was going practically to all these PTA meetings for them. And don't forget, I also have the title of a father with my 3 boys and trying to match those things. So from my perspective, it's not about talk, it's about whatever you are faced with, what do you do immediately to ensure that there's a provision of safety, and there's a provision of the immediate need of the person that you're facing. And so from my perspective, when you face that person, whatever title you go by, the issue is, for me, the biggest thing is, from my origin, it's called Ubuntu. I am because we are. And if I take away the Eurocentric definition of the personhood of the person, I want to flip it to, do you feel me? So if you feel me, what you gonna do about that? And so from that perspective, that's my way of intervention, and that's what we all ought to be doing. What are you going to do about my situation now? And then that really defines the pathway, whatever you call it, treatment plan, you call it intervention plan, whatever you call it, to just bring those things together. And from there, you create a pathway of where you go next.
Those are two tough acts to follow in terms of additional comments. But I want to build on both of them as I think about what I'm able to do, and thinking about the opportunities to be creative, to work with many different types of communities, sometimes students, sometimes other researchers, sometimes staff. Remind you people in higher ed, it's not all about the faculty, the staff do matter. And sometimes it's big communities within the scope of interventions that I've been studying. But regardless of what type of community, looking at the similarity of what people need. Okay, mentioning what was in another country and what's in Baltimore, how those are similar. Thinking about flipping the script between the student and the professor. So how do I combine those in what I do? One, notice that most of the time there's something, and this is the economist in me coming out, it's a lack of resources and a lack of ability to allocate them efficiently. So how do we build up that community? How do the values that I teach about now help to build community and sustain community when the faith of the community in its leadership and in each other is tested? And when I think about my version of flipping the script between the student and the professor, A, much like my colleague, it's reminding myself I always have something to learn. And B, it's reminding myself that I have the privilege to give myself the time to listen to the person in the community, preferably listen to the whole community, and recognize that no matter what I might think the solution should be, the community knows itself best. The community probably has solutions already, and it's not my job to tell them what to do most of the time. If it's a purely technical issue and I have the expertise, fine. But for most things, the job is to listen and figure out how I can use the privilege that I have to amplify, as opposed to telling people this is the way to do things. And that's been effective in a variety of communities I've had the chance to work with. Thank you.
I'm now remembering why I was asked to be on this panel. And I'm very moved by everyone's, but particularly Achike's story. And when I met Chijoke, and he told me that his father was Igbo and from Biafra, I recalled that when I was 12 years old in middle school, the very first time I'd seen children with a bloated belly, that I helped to raise money to send to the children of Biafra. And it might have been $10 or $20 in those days, but I think it was the very first signs of compassion in a young and self-centered child. But then, more importantly, I think maybe it delves into something that's deeper and a larger theme that Achike mentioned of Ubuntu, and I put in my own slide that there are many cultures from which that idea is at the core of what is basically good about humans. And it was alluded to in the prior panel, that how do we have our children have a good heart? We love them, we tell them they're enough, and we hug them. I'm amazed that from the background, from the experience, from the trauma that Achike mentioned, that he finds in himself a heart to reach out to others. And what a great example for all of us. So the little child in me did it at the level I could. I try to do it now, but again, I'm humbled by the people in this room and what they can do. I'll just say that one thing we can all think about doing is that old adage of think globally, act locally, and touching one mind, one child, one heart is what we can do.
My last question before I leave for Q&A is that I had the pleasure of being able to meet and be mentored by Congressman Elijah Cummings, who passed away a few years ago. And Elijah always used to say that the children are the living messengers of a future that we will never see. And my last question to the panelists before I go for Q&A, is that in the cadence of that quote, what message do you want us to pass on to a future that you may never see?
There's a message that I said I teach my children. Teach them passion and compassion. Passion for life and compassion for their fellow man. And, you know, what I also said before was follow your heart. What you do. Forget about the money. Forget about the circumstances. If you love something, you're passionate for it, you'll go for it. But make sure you bring your brain with you, because you may find out in dead ends and so forth that are unintended and so forth, and you have to think before you leave, so forth. So the next generation, you know, I try to help create, being a teacher all these years, in my worldwide programs, I tried to create a generation of people that are very confident in themselves. I remember a little while ago, just a building down the street here in the Biopark, they had a little social. And a young man came up to me, and he said, "Do you remember me?" And he was like early 30s, he was a black guy with a three-piece suit and so forth. And I saw his name tag, and I said, "Oh yeah." He said, "All these years," he said, "I wanted to come back to you, Dr. Myslinski, and thank you." He said, "You know, you changed my life." He said, before he went into my summer program, right, he said he was floundering, he wasn't going to graduate from high school, that he was dealing with unhealthy crowds and friends and so forth, and he didn't know what to do. But the program that he was in, that I accepted him into, he said, you know, that showed me my potential. It showed me what I can do. It showed me, you know, that I could make this world a better place to live, and showed my leadership abilities and so forth. And so look into yourself. Somebody said today that everybody has some kind of gift. You know, not everybody has the same type of gift. But find that gift, you know, that the good Lord has given you. And don't squander it, don't flounder it. Just, you know, use it, you know, to become a better person.
Yeah, and you know, for me, it's an issue of being intentional. The way that I've, you know, taught or interacted with my kids, I tell them to answer your name. In my Igbo cosmology, we give a lot of value to name. And so, for example, Chijioke, which is the name that he got at his birth, is supposed to be God holds my portion. So it's not only a prophecy, it's also, we ask you to answer your name. The depth in your name defines the way that you recover your integrity, so answer your name. And of course, my name is Achike, which means do not hustle for things that perish. And so for us, from the beginning, it's actually creating that ground to make sure that you don't just say it, you try to exemplify it. So when the kids see how you're walking, they see your swag, then that's the way that they are supposed to flow. And so that you can stand behind your word, because we take parenting as a spirituality, not a science. So primarily that's the message I have. You know, the best life you can live is the life that has integrity. And for the same, going back to how I got my philosophy of companionship is feel the person, welcome the person, create a space for engagement. The rest would evolve by itself.
So once again, I feel like there's so much to build on. Thinking about living out your name rather than just saying it. Again, teaching all these students from China. The Mandarin version of Davina is Davina, which is grace and wisdom. And I was recently asked to give a 7-minute talk, and I talked about my 29 years at Johns Hopkins in 7 minutes. And I got to actually close with the advice I would have given my 13-year-old self. So this is very relevant to something that I talked about recently. And the reason it was my 13-year-old self was when I was 11, for some reason in a creative writing assignment, I signed it. It was a hypothetical letter to the editor, and I signed it as a physician in Baltimore. I lived outside of Philadelphia. I don't know what I was thinking at the time, but it was interestingly prescient. And then the start of the 7-minute talk was talking about a picture taken in 1983 at the South Gate of Johns Hopkins. Picture any 1980s period movie. Flannel shirt, thick glass glasses with plastic frames, and a scowl on my face because I really didn't want my mother taking my picture. So the advice that I would have given my 13-year-old self in that picture now, 1, this idea that you have of helping people as your North Star, great, but don't think for a minute you should have figured out what you're going to do by the time you're 13 or 17 or 21 or 26 when I got my PhD. You have your whole lifetime to figure out what you're supposed to do. Be intentional, but you have your whole lifetime to figure out what you want to do. 2, you want to dream big, but you can dream bigger. For your North Star that I had at the time of wanting to help people, imagine all the ways you could help people and all the different communities that you could help. Double it, and you still will not have a number big enough for the opportunities that will present themselves if you're vulnerable and if you're open to change. And then 3, the advice to my scowling self, just smile some. Because whatever your North Star is, people will see it better, people will feel they're more invited to come along on the journey with you, and people will just feel it coming out of you more if you can smile and shine that North Star rather than keeping it inside of you.
Everybody took the good ideas, so let's hope we got that. So, you know, I'll start with most of my life I worked very hard to be an academic and climb the ladder and do the comparisons and all of it, and never really brought me that much happiness, to tell you the truth. And so I think the wisdom that comes a little with age is finding out what's truly important, and maybe that's something to pass on to children. I have a dear friend who's passed. His name is Friedrich Bonhoeffer. His uncle has a national day named after him because he was responsible for part of the team for the assassination of Hitler. Friedrich lived all of his life with famous people and great scientists, and I remember coming up to him and saying one day, you know, Friedrich, I've spent my whole life trying to be a great man, and now I would like to try to be a good man. And Friedrich, in his wisdom, looks at me, twinkle eyes, and says, and that is so much harder. But if I were to give advice to children now and what their future generation and happiness would be, it wouldn't be to climb the ladder, although you need to do that, you need to have a job, you need to do all those kinds of things and get satisfaction from work, but it's some way to find, to develop a good heart. There's a saint named Sainte Thérèse de Lisieux from France, a 19th century saint. And she had a wonderful phrase, which was, I work every day to have a good heart so that God has a good place, nice place to live.
I'd like 15 seconds just to express my feeling about the vibes that I've been getting with these panels, especially this panel, and the emotions that I feel. I mean, the 4 words that came up, which I really love. Hug, it came up a number of times. Smile, which I think was very good, an example for one of you. And I'd like to add love. To me, God is love, and if we can pass that down to our children, I think our next generations are going to be much better off.
Any questions?
Hello. First, I just want to thank you all for all the insight that you shared. That's my dad. My name, my full name is Belolisa. That means reverence for God, or if not for God. So I just wanted to. I don't. A lot of times I like to shorten it to make people just not have to pronounce it. But I wanted to just express that. I know my dad. He expressed, you have to answer to your name, so I wanted to say that first. But I think my question is centered around identity, and I like to give a background to my question. In high school, I read a book called Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, where I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but this guy one day just wakes up as a bug, and the crazy part about it is that the fact that he's a bug isn't really that crazy to him. It's more of like he realizes, how can I brush my teeth? How can I go to work? Right? Those are the more impactful things. And then we see him being alienated by his family and just in different ways. And so it isn't really the fact that he's a bug, but the alienation and the isolation that comes with it. And I think listening to these panels, it really got me reflecting on my own life, how I feel like I've been on this track, doing all these different things, school, work, but there have been instances in my life where I woke up not really, I don't know how to describe it, but as a bug kind of. I woke up in a space where I realized that there are certain spaces that I wouldn't really be, I wasn't proud of who I was becoming. Maybe I was chasing my passion, but there was just certain aspects of my life that I felt alienated. I felt would alienate me from others. And I think you all have very unique stories. Obviously, my dad coming from Nigeria to Japan to here, being professors, and just very unique stories. And I know that, from just a couple seconds, you can share the story and how everything was seamless, but there have been moments in your journeys where you have probably also experienced something similar, where you woke up and things have changed, whether that was like having, being forcibly separated from your family, or something happening within your personal identity that, completely changed your worldview or the way the world looked at you. And so my question is, how were you able to deal with that and keep your integrity, answer to your name, just be able to keep that integrity throughout it all while trying to satisfy, like society's pressures and things like that. So I know it's kind of a vague question, but I hope you can understand what I'm saying. But if you need me to clarify, that's.
you know, those moments come maybe when I lose a loved one. When my wife died of cancer, you know, it took so long for me to go over it, and you never do. It's always there. It gets easier and easier, but it's always there. So we have a lot of loved ones in our lives, and those moments come, for me at least, you know, when they pass away. And so, you know, to answer your question, that's one of my answers. I had something else to say, but at my age, I just forgot what it was.
So for me, it's quite interesting because I moved between the two schools at the university in 2013. 2015 comes and I'm working with a coach, and she says to me, "Why do you work yourself to the point of exhaustion every day?" And I tried 3 times to answer Misty, and Misty said to me each time, "Stop. You're using your job title or your job description. You're not telling me why you work yourself so hard every day." And I couldn't give her an intrinsic answer on that day in 2015. It was 5 years later when I kind of had an answer, and now what I have written on my board is emphatically instigate authentic pursuit of reflectively discerned purpose. That's what I try to do when I work with people as a teacher, as a mentor, and hopefully the research that I do will let people be healthier so they can pursue that as well. I didn't know my core values. I did some exercises and I found that they have to do with authenticity, connection, reflection, and empathy. Recognizing those, recognizing another part of my journey where I got to re-choose a name in my 50s. Those together have made such a difference because when I recognized all of that, I decided to live into it rather than run from it, and that was what I was meant to be rather than having to continue to ask the question what I was meant to be. The way that I have related to people over the past 12 months has been completely different than how I've related to people before that. And not that course evaluations are the most effective method of figuring out how well I'm relating to people, but after 29 years to get the best course evaluations ever in the class where you were in with me, and then an even better one that I got in the class that I taught in spring 1, and feeling like I'm connecting with students in an entirely different way as one little microcosm of all the ways that I connect with all the people who I'm interacting with. It really does say something that it can take a long time to figure out what is that true, deepest, most core identity. But once you figure out if it is something that you can give yourself the opportunity to live into, it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, so I guess if there's that transformative moment or that, whatever you want to call it, probably my failed marriage. You know, it's an interesting thing. You go through life and you think everything's going great, and not my problem, it's her problem, et cetera, et cetera. And to truly fail at something, something that you care about, is transformative. And in my case, it brought me to question all the kinds of things that I thought were so important. My career, the academic ladder, all those things. It brought me to God. And that's the greatest gift I've ever had. There's a spiritual person named Richard Rohr, some of you may have read him or heard of him. He has a book called Falling Upward. And it's the idea that you only grow spiritually when you die. And you die metaphorically at first, and it's absolutely true. And failure is it. As a society in America, we so hate the word, we fear it. It's a plague. We don't want to get close to it, but it is the opportunity that you have to question those things that you think are important and find the things that are truly important.
I remember what I was going to say. And answer your question about identity. You know, I think it's very important for me and for the future generations that you create your own identity. That you don't depend upon circumstances to create your identity. You don't depend upon other people. You don't depend upon, politicians. You don't depend upon other situations. You depend upon yourself. Like I said before, you follow your heart. And as Frank Sinatra said in his song, you know, do it your way. You remember that song? I did it my way. But as far as identity goes, you have to be true to yourself. You know, true to yourself and what, you know, God, how God made you. So that was what I remember.
For me, the core of claiming your independence is about discernment. I used to, you know, when I was in the class for diagnosis of mental health issues, you know, all this issue with DSM-5 and ICD, and you discover people will say you're suffering with depression or anxiety or schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. All those sound English to me. And the reason is because being born in Nigeria, in the place that was impacted by the war, it actually shatters every conception you have about who you are when you are placed in that situation or experience it. And then going to Japan, where the main exposure was to Shinto and Buddhism, coming from a Catholic background. And then of course, you know, doing some studies, you know, related to what you call it, counseling, you know, healing, psychotherapy, all that stuff, including things that transition from, you know, spirituality, because I was taught by one Jesuit priest they called Father Bulatao, who was the chief exorcist when Cardinal Saint was the Archbishop of the Metro Manila Archdiocese, the place, the East Asia Pastoral Institute, which is part of Ateneo University. And then we were asking him this question: when people come for all kinds of healing and prayer and intervention, and they were asking him, because as an exorcist, for those who are unfamiliar with Catholic orientation, there has to be an examination and exploration that proves that there is a need for exorcism to happen. So it doesn't really happen. So in spite of the huge population that believes they are being oppressed or possessed or stuff that come to him for healing, so we ask him, how do you as a psychiatrist consent to exorcism? And what's the difference between possession, obsession, and exorcism? So he told the story. For the 15 years he was in the diocese of Manila, Metro Manila, he had only conducted or consented to 4 exorcisms. And within that time, he had about 15,000 candidates or families who had come to have, you know, evil cast away from someone. So they were asking him, what's your anecdote? How do you accomplish what you do? And so, which brings us back to insight. Say, when a family comes for intervention, they will sit down and they will tell their stories. And all he provides is that space where they begin to, how do you say, attain discernment, attain insight. And so when we are talking about people becoming themselves and claiming their story and claiming their future, it is not possible without discernment. And so that insight, that space for insight, is the most scarce commodity with the cacophony of sounds that we face, with the hustle, with the effort to pay the bills. And so for me, and I'm really, how do you say, fanatical in that belief, is create a space for discernment and discernment leads you to grab the it. And from that space, you can flourish to become whoever that you have conceived of or thought about being.
Hi, I want to thank you. This has been very, very moving. I was just wondering, you do so much and have worked so much throughout the world in communities. I was just wondering what you have learned from your own children. What have they taught you?
They taught me a lot. I mean, they keep calling me all the time, Daddy, gotta take more iron. Daddy, you should eat better. Or, you know, and they do things, and they have such passion about their lives and initiative and so forth. And I look at them and I say, you know what? I should be more like that. You know, instead of me giving them an example, and I'm sure I did that through their formative years as they were growing up and so forth, and now that they're on their own in their late 20s, you know, I look at them and, you know, I'm inspired. They are inspiring me with their example of how hard they work, you know, their imagination, their intuition, you know, their love for traveling and doing a good job and so forth. And so I'm just, you know, inspired by them, like I said before, by all my students and all around the world. You know, locally, my students, my grand students. You know, I teach the children of my former students. I'm waiting to teach the great-grandchildren of my former students. But anyway, yeah, they, you know, you want specifics, but, you know, there's so many things that, you know, I do learn from them, and I keep my eyes open, you know, and I respect them for what they say. We don't agree on everything. There's some things we disagree, but we can disagree amicably. You know, we have scientific, you know, discussions, but you don't have the emotion in there and so forth. You tell me what they think, and I tell them what I think, you know, and so forth, but it doesn't hinder our relationship whatsoever. So, you know, there's so many things that they have taught me. But that's a good question. Anybody else?
I'd say the most important thing that I learned from my children, despite the fact that they're ages 20 to 29 and are certainly of the generation that we would call digital natives, is connect for real. You know, they emphasize, why are you taking so many pictures? Just experience things. You know, don't be posting things on social media, just experience it. Share it, talk about it, be with us. When my spouse and I and all three of our sons and all three significant others get together, we call ourselves the Fantastic Eight. And there's no better reason than to get us together than we have a silly tradition over many years. You know, Catholic family, the significant others are not Catholic, one of whom is Jewish, but for many years we would make latkes on the day we bought a Christmas tree. Fun cross-cultural thing. Didn't get to do that in 2024, but we did have a dinner with latkes at our youngest son's apartment just after the New Year. And there's this book called Herschel and the Hanukkah Goblins, written apparently originally for Cricket magazine, but then was illustrated, and it was written as sort of a, not a replacement for A Christmas Carol, but for Hanukkah, but in the same spirit of having otherworldly spirits that people on earth have to deal with respect to a religious holiday. Many years we'd read it as part of the family dinner on the day we made latkes. It was always read by one person. On this day, for the first time, we each took a scene and read one scene. All 8 of us got a chance to read, and it ended with the youngest significant other, who happens to be the one who was Jewish. And that symbolism, that spirit of what happens when we sit together and just are, and just appreciate each other, and turn off the TV, and just have conversation, makes such a difference for the 8 of us. So I think that's the most important thing I've learned from my children.
Another thing that I've learned is not to be materialistic. My kids are not materialistic at all. I think this generation that they're in, and I think bouncing off your comments, your children are about the same age. And that is, they say, at Christmas time, they say, Daddy, don't buy us things. We want experiences. So, one good thing I learned from them is not to be too materialistic.
First and foremost, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for speaking tonight. My question, it leads off of Bill's question just a little bit. My question is, can you speak as far as to confidence and where you all get your confidence from, and what advice that you can tell to a younger generation, how to be more confident? Because I know in my life, I'm just turning 28. I didn't feel confident until probably like last year. And the way I got to that is I had to get comfortable with failure. I failed a number of times, but that's not, you can't really tell the next generation, you're gonna fail 1,000 times before you really get it right. That's not the most encouraging advice. But as far as like where you speak of identity and knowing yourself, where does that confidence come from?
You got yours last year? Well, I'm 78, and I got mine last year too. Age has a lot to do with it. You get older, just more and more confident. You're more set in your ways. You're more sure about yourself as you get older. You're less inhibited. When I was younger, I was, I shouldn't say that, because it would put me in a bad light, or, I don't know, I'll be able to do that. I shouldn't volunteer for that. I shouldn't do that, because you don't have that confidence. But as you get older and as you do things, if you do things and you practice them and you learn things, knowing what it's all about, I think is a great way to gain confidence. If you start to lecture on something, you have to know the material. If you don't know the material, you're not going to have that much confidence up there with you talking. But if you do learn the material and you have confidence, and then you don't have to focus on how you're lecturing. You can focus on the audience. You can focus on your students. You can focus on whether or not they hear you, whether they understand you, or whether they're baffled, or whether they're bored, and so forth. And so, just making sure you're prepared. Like the old Boy Scout motto, be prepared. It's a good way to, gain confidence through the years.
Yeah, the issue of confidence is actually, we go back to the original template, which I talked about, which is when you keep yourself in the space of discernment. The three spiritual traditions have been very aware of being born Catholic, Christian, also having exposure to Shinto, Buddhism, these three ways, and you find out that what they aspire is the same thing. In Buddhism, is enlightenment. Okay, so when you meditate, you're trying to find the core of your center. And let's say you keep getting the same message, you develop a level of congruence that you say, you can almost hold it tangibly, saying that this is insight, where everything mediates. And so, that confidence comes from when everything is really noisy around you, you have that moment that you can, go into yourself, you find that answer deepest, and then whatever is vacillating or whatever is the noise begins to diminish. So for me, having that opportunity to always have that moment of stepping in, into the cave of yourself, of your soul, however you want to characterize it, it sharpens your vision, and that vision is what is the magnet for your confidence, because you know that where you're standing is sort of, there's more clarity to where you're standing than anything else.
And I certainly could give the answer that my confidence, I was lucky enough to be born with 4 great-grandparents alive. I remember my one great-grandmother, with her very wrinkled skin from many, many years spent working outdoors, told me, you could do anything, you'd be president someday. And for some years I bought into that. And then I got unconfident, because I'm like, what would I ever do to get there? And as recently as teaching this course about leadership and values, that I just got some of the best course evals I've ever gotten, I still feel like a bit of imposter syndrome. What is an economist doing teaching a course on leadership and values? But coming out of the question and the comment about discernment, and it's something that has been mentioned multiple times, when you are able to get to that point of discernment and figure out what your truth is, it doesn't inherently make you confident, but it is much easier to find your confidence if you are living your truth and you've found the truth that you know you're doing what is right. That's right.
Again, not much to add to the others. I think you actually already got it, the giving up the fear of failure. I mean, I think we so cling to this, and if there's any advice that one can give, it's enjoying the journey and living in the present moment. There are many different outcomes that can come from this, and we cling to the one, oh, I have to be this or get that. That's not necessarily the right path, or even the one that's going to lead you eventually to, the happiness. There's a wonderful phrase of, how do I know the difference between God's will and my will? And the answer is, my will hurts. And I think that's very true, that we don't really know what's going to go on next, and all we have is this present moment. To regret the past, to fear the future, not meaningful. Getting to that point where we can just enjoy the journey. It's easy to say when you're an old guy like me, and harder when you're in the middle of it, and I'm sure that there's anxieties that come up for each and every one of us. But the more you can give up to that, what you just said, letting go of that fear of failure, the better off you're going to be.
Can we give a round of applause for the Cuba family? So I'd like to end this this healing session with a poem that I wrote in ode to this event, to this moment, and to many more moments to come as we continue this journey of life. Swimming in shallow water gives the human mind control, a pure bliss and complete ignorance of the power of the sea. Upon approaching the reality of the world beyond, Dia unravel the silver night, but even as we enter the Anthropocene, Earth's most intellectual species can only inhabit 29% of its mass. Our so-called evolution of innovation comes in definition of other species and ecosystems that are pertinent to the prosperity of our survival. Swimming in shallow water gives the human control, and that's okay because Black people can't swim. But apparently, even after the transatlantic slave trade, swimming was a part of other sporting events while slave masters watched. For entertainment, excitement turned to fear as these talented West African slaves would use the skill to escape for freedom, a fear engraved in the Negro Seaman Act of 1822 that would imprison Black seamen, furthered by the segregation laws of the Jim Crow era preventing Black people from public pools. My father was always a good swimmer. He was a child soldier of Biafra. I was born long after the civil war that rocked my country, Nigeria, and set the impetus for the fight of the Igbos to uncharted waters. The bliss of sovereignty following the country's independence from colonial rule was no more. Yet, as I acclimated to the bustling halls
of Northwood Elementary School, I couldn't fathom that the same children who beat down on me physically and verbally also revered Martin Luther King, a civil rights leader that stood alongside Ezekiel, the first president of Nigeria, and Martin's inspiration in Black America's search for freedom. In this first quarter of the 21st century, the tides are ever increasing. Pro-social behavior is almost non-existent, but I'd be remiss to accept the ultimatum of this Anthropocene. In this age of Darwinism, you have been chosen. Upon forsaking the mighty shade of shallow waters, the rifts of the sea is now entrenched in the palm of your hands. Thank you.
Would you honor please pose for a picture? Close together.